Alexander Cole froze halfway down the hallway of his mansion. That sound. It was laughter. Not just any laughter. His daughter's laughter. For 3 years, Alexander had walked these marble floors hearing nothing but silence from Emily's room. No laughter, no music, no happiness. Just the quiet hum of machines and the soft turning of wheelchair wheels. But tonight, she was laughing. Loudly. He rushed toward her bedroom door, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from his chest. When he pushed the door open, Emily was sitting in her wheelchair beside the window, gripping the armrests as she laughed uncontrollably. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Alexander hadn't seen that look on her face since before the accident. "Emily?" he said softly. She didn't answer. She was staring outside, still laughing. Confused, Alexander stepped closer and looked out the window. And that's when he saw him. Across the quiet street, under a flickering streetlight, a skinny boy in torn clothes was dancing. Not normal dancing, ridiculous dancing. He spun in circles, slipped in a puddle, pretended to fall dramatically, then jumped back up doing exaggerated robot moves. He waved his arms like a cartoon character and made the most ridiculous faces. Emily burst into another wave of laughter. Alexander stared in disbelief. The boy wasn't looking at the mansion gate. He wasn't begging. He wasn't asking for money. He was dancing directly toward Emily's window. And somehow, he knew exactly how to make her laugh. Alexander whispered, "Who is that boy?" Emily wiped tears from her eyes. "I don't know," she giggled, "but he's funny." For 3 years, Alexander had spent millions of dollars trying to make his daughter smile again. Doctors, therapists, psychologists, private tutors. Nothing worked. Yet some random boy in ripped shoes was doing it in minutes. The boy suddenly pretended to moonwalk, slipped again, and landed flat on the ground. Emily laughed so hard she leaned forward in her chair. Alexander couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then the boy stood up, bowed dramatically toward the window like he had just finished a performance, and ran off into the darkness. Emily sighed happily. That was the best show ever. Alexander stood there stunned. But what shocked him the most was the sound that followed. Emily humming. Later that night, Alexander sat in his office staring at the security monitors. He rewound the footage again and again. The boy had appeared at exactly 7 p.m., danced for 10 minutes, then disappeared. No begging, no knocking, nothing. Just dancing. Alexander leaned back in his chair. "Who are you?" he murmured. The next evening, at 6:58 p.m., Alexander stood quietly behind Emily's wheelchair as she waited by the window. Her eyes were glued to the street. "You're waiting for him," Alexander said gently. Emily nodded. "He said he'd come back." Alexander frowned. "He spoke to you?" Emily shook her head. "No, but when he left yesterday, he pointed at his wrist like this." She mimicked checking a watch. Alexander looked outside. The street was empty. 6:59. Emily held her breath. Then suddenly, a shadow ran under the streetlight. The boy appeared again and immediately began dancing. This time his performance was even crazier. He pretended to trip over invisible objects. He spun so fast he almost fell into a bush. He did terrible breakdance moves that looked like someone fighting a swarm of bees. Emily exploded with laughter. Alexander crossed his arms, watching carefully. The boy was definitely performing for the window, and somehow he knew Emily was watching. But how? The mansion gate was tall. The walls were high. Yet the boy positioned himself perfectly under the one streetlight that illuminated Emily's room. Alexander turned to his daughter. "Emily, does he know you?" "No." "Have you ever spoken to him?" No. Then why would he do this? Emily shrugged. Maybe he just likes making people laugh. Alexander stared outside again. But tonight he noticed something else. The boy's shoes were barely holding together. His jacket was far too thin for the cold evening wind. And yet he danced like the happiest kid in the world. 10 minutes later, the boy bowed again and ran off. Emily sighed happily. Alexander made a decision. He grabbed his phone. "Security," he said. "Tomorrow night when that boy comes back, I want to know exactly who he is." The following evening, 2 security guards waited outside the mansion gate. Alexander watched through the cameras. 7 p.m. The boy arrived again. He started dancing. Emily laughed upstairs. Alexander nodded to the guards. "Go." The guards walked toward the boy, but the moment he noticed them, the boy froze. Then he bolted. "Hey, stop!" one guard shouted. The boy ran like a lightning bolt down the street and vanished between buildings. The guards returned a few minutes later. "Sorry, sir," one said. "Kid's fast." Alexander rubbed his temple. Upstairs, Emily sat silently by the window. No laughter, no humming, just quiet. She looked at her father. Why did they scare him away? Alexander hesitated. "I just wanted to talk to him." "Well, now he won't come back," she said quietly. Her voice carried a sadness Alexander hadn't heard in weeks. That night he couldn't sleep. He replayed the footage again. Something about the boy's dancing felt genuine. Not like he wanted something, but like he truly enjoyed making Emily laugh. Alexander finally sighed and muttered, "Tomorrow I'll handle it myself." The next evening, Alexander stood alone outside the mansion gate before 7 p.m. The street was quiet. A cold breeze rustled the trees. Then, at exactly 7 o'clock, the boy appeared. But when he saw Alexander standing there, he stopped dead in his tracks. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. The boy slowly turned to leave. "Wait," Alexander called. The boy froze. Alexander stepped forward carefully. "I'm not going to hurt you." The boy looked nervous. Alexander spoke calmly. "You've been dancing for my daughter." Silence. Then the boy shrugged. "Maybe." Alexander studied him. Up close, he looked even younger than he had thought. Maybe 11, maybe 12. "What's your name?" Alexander asked. "Leo." Alexander nodded. "Leo, why are you dancing outside my house every night?" Leo looked down at his shoes. Then he kicked a small rock on the road. Finally, he muttered something so quietly Alexander almost didn't hear it. "Because she looked sad." Alexander frowned. "What?" Leo looked up. "I saw her crying one day." Alexander felt his chest tighten. Leo continued, speaking a little faster now. "I was walking past and I saw her through the window. She was crying and nobody was with her." He shrugged again. "So the next day I came back and danced." Alexander blinked in disbelief. "You mean, that's it?" Leo nodded. "She laughed." Alexander felt a strange lump in his throat. "And you kept coming back?" Leo shrugged again. "Yeah." "Why?" Leo looked genuinely confused. "Because it worked." Alexander stared at him, speechless. Then he asked quietly, "Leo, where do you live?" Leo hesitated. Then he pointed vaguely down the street. "Around? Do you have parents?" Leo didn't answer. Alexander felt his stomach twist. "Leo," he said gently, "are you homeless?" The boy finally nodded. "Sort of." Alexander was silent for a long moment. Upstairs, he could see Emily's silhouette waiting by the window. watching, waiting. Alexander took a slow breath. Then he said something that would change all their lives. "Leo, would you like to come inside and meet her?" Leo's eyes widened. "Inside?" "Yes." Leo looked at the giant mansion, then at his dirty clothes, then back at Alexander. "You're not joking." Alexander shook his head. "No." Leo swallowed hard. "Okay." And upstairs, Emily had no idea that the next few minutes would change her life forever. Alexander opened the gate slowly and gestured for Leo to follow him. The boy stepped inside like someone entering another world. His eyes widened at the massive driveway, the glowing garden lights, and the towering mansion that looked more like a palace than a house. "Whoa," Leo whispered. Alexander noticed how carefully Leo walked, like he was afraid he might dirty something just by being near it. "Relax," Alexander said calmly. "You're not in trouble." Leo nodded nervously. Inside the mansion, the warmth hit him immediately. He rubbed his hands together, clearly not used to heated rooms. Alexander led him toward the elevator. Leo stared at the golden buttons. "You have an elevator? In your house?" Alexander almost smiled. "Yes." The elevator doors opened upstairs, and they stepped out into the quiet hallway. Emily was still near the window. She turned when she heard the footsteps. At first, she looked confused. Then her eyes widened. "It's him!" she shouted excitedly. Leo froze. He waved awkwardly. Hi." Emily laughed again. "You're the dancing guy." Leo scratched the back of his head. "Yeah, I guess." Alexander stepped aside. "Emily, this is Leo." Emily rolled her wheelchair closer. Up close, Leo could see the metal frame and the blanket covering her legs. For a moment, his smile faded. "You can't walk?" he asked softly. Emily shook her head. "Not right now." Leo nodded slowly. Then suddenly he clapped his hands. "Well, that's okay," he said, "because my dancing works better when people sit down anyway." Emily burst into laughter again. Alexander watched quietly from the doorway. Something incredible was happening. For the first time in years, Emily was acting like a normal kid. The next evening, when Leo arrived again, Alexander was waiting for him. "Leo," he said calmly. "Yeah?" "I know where you sleep." Leo froze. "It's not illegal," Leo said quickly. "Nobody uses that building." Alexander shook his head. "That's not the problem." Leo looked nervous. "Then what is?" Alexander looked directly at him. "You shouldn't be sleeping there." Leo crossed his arms defensively. "I'm fine." Alexander took a slow breath. Then he said something unexpected. "Would you like to stay here tonight?" Leo blinked. "What?" "In the guest room." Leo stared at the mansion, then at Emily watching from the hallway. Then he asked the question that stunned Alexander. "You're not doing this because you feel sorry for me, right?" Alexander paused. Then he answered honestly, "No." "Then why?" Alexander looked at his daughter, then back at Leo. "Because you gave my daughter something I couldn't buy with all the money in the world." Leo scratched his head. "What's that?" Alexander smiled slightly. "Her laugh." Leo looked down shyly. Then he shrugged. "Well, I guess I could stay one night." Neither of them realized that this one decision was about to change everything. Because in the months ahead, something incredible would happen. Something that doctors would call impossible. And it would all start with a boy who simply wanted to make someone laugh. Leo stepped into the mansion again that night, but this time it felt different. He wasn't just visiting, he was staying. Alexander showed him a guest room down the hallway. The room alone was bigger than the abandoned building Leo had been sleeping in. Leo stood at the door, staring at the bed. It looked too perfect to touch. "Is this really for me?" he asked. Alexander nodded. "Yes." Leo slowly walked toward the bed and pressed the mattress with his hand. It sank softly. He laughed in disbelief. "This thing is softer than clouds." Emily wheeled herself into the doorway. "You've never slept on a bed before?" Leo shrugged. "Not really." Emily looked at her father with wide eyes. Alexander felt a heavy weight in his chest. Leo suddenly flopped backward onto the mattress. The bed bounced slightly and Leo laughed again. "Okay, I'm never leaving this bed." Emily giggled. Alexander cleared his throat. "Dinner is ready." Leo sat up immediately. "You have dinner too?" Emily laughed harder. "Of course we have dinner." Downstairs, the dining table was filled with food. Leo stopped halfway to the table. "Whoa!" He stared at the plates like they were museum exhibits. Alexander noticed. "Leo, you can sit." Leo slowly pulled out a chair. Then he whispered to Emily, "Which fork do I use?" Emily leaned closer. "Honestly, I have no idea either." Leo grabbed one randomly and began eating carefully. But after the first bite, his eyes widened. "Oh, wow." Emily smiled. "Good?" Leo nodded quickly. "This is the best food I've ever tasted." Alexander watched quietly. For the first time in years, dinner at the mansion felt alive. There was conversation, laughter, noise. Leo told ridiculous stories about trying to catch pigeons for fun. Emily nearly fell out of her wheelchair laughing. After dinner, Leo stood up suddenly. "Oh, wait!" He jumped into the center of the living room. "Night show!" Emily clapped. Leo began dancing again, but halfway through his performance, something unexpected happened. Emily leaned forward in her wheelchair. Her eyes were focused intensely on Leo's feet. Leo spun dramatically across the carpet. "Look at these moves!" he shouted. Emily gripped the armrests of her chair. "Emily?" Alexander asked, but she didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on Leo's feet. Then suddenly she whispered, "I remember that move." Leo stopped. "What?" Emily looked confused. "I used to dance like that." The room fell silent. Emily hadn't talked about dancing since the accident. Leo tilted his head. "Really?" Emily nodded slowly. "Before the crash, I was in dance class." Leo grinned. "Well, you probably danced better than me." Emily smiled faintly. Then she said something that made Alexander hold his breath. "I wish I could try again." Alexander stepped forward quickly. "Emily." But she shook her head. "I know I can't stand yet." Leo suddenly crouched in front of her wheelchair. "Who said anything about standing?" Emily frowned. Leo pointed at her hands. "You can still dance with those." He started moving his arms in exaggerated motions. "Upper body dance." Emily laughed. "That's not real dancing." Leo shrugged. "It is now." He started doing ridiculous arm waves and shoulder shimmies. Emily copied him. Her movements were small at first, but she kept going. Leo shouted dramatically, "Ladies and gentlemen, We now present the world's first seated dance battle. Emily laughed and moved her arms again. Alexander watched in stunned silence. For the first time since the accident, Emily was dancing, even if she was sitting. The next morning, something strange happened during Emily's physical therapy session. Her therapist, Dr. Ramirez, was guiding her through the usual exercises. Emily lifted her leg slightly, then stopped. "Wait," she said. Dr. Ramirez looked up. "What is it?" Emily concentrated, then suddenly her toes moved. Just a little, but they moved. Dr. Ramirez froze. "Emily, do that again." Emily focused harder. Her toes twitched. Dr. Ramirez gasped. "That's incredible." Alexander rushed forward. "What happened?" Dr. Ramirez looked stunned. "She's regaining nerve response faster than expected." Emily blinked. "You mean that's good?" "Very good." That evening, Leo returned to his usual performance in the living room. But this time, Emily stopped him. "Leo?" "Yeah?" "Watch this." She focused again, and slowly, her toes moved. Leo's mouth dropped open. "Whoa!" Emily grinned. "I did that." Leo started jumping around the room. "She did that! She did that!" Alexander felt his eyes sting. Dr. Ramirez later explained something important. "Emily's emotional state has completely changed," the doctor said. "She's motivated again. That's powerful for recovery." Alexander knew exactly why. Leo. Weeks passed. Leo stayed at the mansion more often. Emily laughed every day. Therapy improved. And something else started happening. Emily began trying harder. One afternoon during therapy, she managed to lift her leg higher than before. Dr. Ramirez shook his head in amazement. "This progress is remarkable." That evening, Emily told Leo, "Guess what I did today?" "What?" "I lifted my leg this high." She demonstrated with her hands. Leo gasped dramatically. "That's superhero level." Emily giggled. But not everyone was happy about Leo staying. One evening, Alexander overheard two staff members whispering, "That homeless kid shouldn't be here. He's probably using them." Alexander stepped into the hallway. The staff immediately fell silent. Alexander spoke calmly. "That boy saved my daughter's happiness." They lowered their heads. "But, sir," one said carefully, "what if he's just pretending?" Alexander thought about that later that night. Could Leo be pretending? Using them? The next day, Alexander decided to test him. He called Leo into his office. Leo looked nervous. "Am I in trouble?" Alexander opened a drawer and placed a thick envelope on the desk. "What's that?" Leo asked. "Money." Leo blinked. "A lot of money." Leo stared at the envelope, then back at Alexander. "What for?" Alexander watched him closely. "For dancing for Emily." Leo frowned. "That's weird." "Why?" Leo shrugged. "Because I wasn't doing it for money." Alexander pushed the envelope closer. "You could buy a lot of things with this." Leo looked uncomfortable. Then he pushed the envelope back across the desk. "I don't want it." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" Leo answered simply, "Because Emily is my friend." Alexander sat there quietly. The test had just given him his answer. Leo wasn't pretending. He was genuine. Exactly 1 year later, Alexander would make an announcement that nobody expected. It would change Leo's life forever. Emily could now stand. She could move, and she had laughter again. At the press conference, Alexander declared the creation of the Leo Foundation, a home for homeless children. Leo officially became part of the family. Emily whispered, "My brother." Leo smiled, speechless. Later that evening, Leo stood by the same window where he used to dance outside. Emily rolled beside him. "You know something?" she said. "What?" "You're still a terrible dancer." Leo laughed. "Hey, my dancing saved the day." Emily smiled. "That's true." Alexander watched them quietly. Two kids from completely different worlds. One had everything but happiness. The other had nothing but kindness. And somehow, they saved each other. If this story touched your heart, make sure you like this video. And if you believe kindness can change lives, subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. Also tell us in the comments, would you have done the same thing Leo did? Because sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change someone's life forever.